Hey, and welcome back. I hope you're having a nice week. I'm Anna Cha. I'm an environmental filmmaker and photographer, and I'm here today to tell you about one of my biggest passions, which is environmental filmmaking. But more specifically, I'd like to tell you about my 10 favorite environmental documentaries. So documentaries that have really shaped my life and my understanding, for example, of the climate crisis and what environmental activism is all about. So we'll get to that top 10 environmental films that I recommend. Some of them are available on Netflix, and I'll make sure to make that clear in the video. So yeah, we'll get through that rating in just a minute. But before that, I did want to tell you that environmental filmmaking is something that I'm really passionate about, not just because I love watching them, but also because I've made an environmental documentary myself. So back 3 years ago already, I was in college, so I was wrapping up that whole experience, but I was also finishing directing, filming, and writing my first full-length feature, and it's called Pursuing the Monarchs. So it's about the monarch migration from North America to Mexico, and it's sort of, I guess, an investigative piece that tries to explain the reasons behind the decline of that population. So that population has seen an 80% decline in just 20 years, so something very, very drastic. And the documentary talks about what are the reasons behind that decline and who's responsible. But yeah, moving on, that's Pursuing the Monarchs. I'm going to link the trailer in the description and the free movie if you're interested in watching it and learning more about that film. But that's also one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about environmental filmmaking, and I wanted to share my top 10 favorite environmental films. So yeah, let's go through the rating. Get rolling. Number 10 is a movie I actually watched last night, and it's called My Octopus Teacher. It's available on Netflix. I must say that at first I was a bit skeptical. Well, to set you up, essentially the plot line is a man that starts a friendship with an octopus. I know, sounds kind of crazy just right off the bat, but it's a documentary, it's a real story. I think it's a really interesting story. But one thing I was a bit skeptical about in this film is the way that octopus was personified by the main character, the man. I mean, he uses terms like falling in love and missing the octopus. So that's one thing that sort of put me off with this documentary, is the way that octopus was really personified. But I think it's also interesting because it raises a question of, we never really see these sort of movies, and maybe that's why we're uncomfortable, because we're just not used to that concept of real incredible friendships between humans and animals, outside of pets, for example, traditional pets like dogs and cats and whatnot, or a farmer and his cow. We think a man and an octopus sounds really strange, but anyway, moving on to why I think it's just a bit off-putting at first. I do think it's a documentary that is really worth watching, also because it makes you a bit uncomfortable and it kind of pushes the boundary of what we're expecting from an environmental film. But in the end, that film really ties together activism and why we should care about the environment and why we should try to get out and really learn our proximate natural environments. So that's My Octopus Teacher. Number 9 is Kiss the Ground. That's also a film that I've seen really recently. It's available on Netflix as well. It's a really good film. It's a very, very informational film. To give you a little bit of an idea without any spoiler, it's about soil's ability to capture carbon dioxide and store it as a solution to mitigate climate change. So the movie doesn't have a real story per se. It's just interviews of people who work in that environment, who've noticed the potential of soil as a climate mitigator. So it's quite an interesting movie, but I watched it with my partner and he described it in a really great way. He said it's a good refresher. And that's what it is. I mean, if you're feeling sort of wobbly on those notions and these natural processes such as photosynthesis, Kiss the Ground is a really good movie to get you back up to speed on sort of your environmental facts. But outside of that is not a particularly visually striking documentary or a special story. It's just a really good informational movie. For now, we'll move on to number 8. Number 8 is for my French speakers out there. It's called Once Upon a Forest. Il était une fois une forêt in French. And it is a movie by, let me get his name right, Luc Jacquet. And it's a really extraordinarily powerful movie for someone who's interested in forest, and especially seeing a forest come to life. So there's a lot of animation that's put on top of the movie, which makes it really interesting and sort of unique. And it talks about all the processes of how a forest grows and why they're so important to us. Little tip with this movie, once you're looking it up, make sure you put Once Upon a Forest documentary, otherwise you're gonna fall on this weird animation movie that has 22% on Rotten Tomatoes about a mole, and that's not the one I'm talking about. Obviously, it's the one about trees. All right, number 7, let's go. Number 7 is Before the Flood. And the story is Leonardo DiCaprio, yes, the actor, goes around and interviews a bunch of scientists, influential people in the realm of climate science and climate change. And so he goes around and tries to really understand what is at stake right now with climate change. It isn't a perfect movie, but it's very self-critical, which I think is very interesting for a documentary. I think it's important to know that no documentary is perfect and sort of live with it openly. So it is a really good film with a lot of information, very valuable information about climate science and climate change. So if you're interested in checking it out, Leonardo is an added bonus. I mean, he's an awesome activist and an awesome actor. So seeing him use his influence as a famous actor for the environmental movement is something that's very powerful as well. My number 6 is called More Than Honey. And More Than Honey already has a couple years, and there's been other movies that's come out since then about the same topic, but I do think this one is sort of a classic, a must-see environmental film, really sort of setting the ground for these amazingly visually striking environmental documentaries that really make you want to act. So this one's about honeybees, so relationship between men and bees, and it draws the portrait of the small family farm opposed to sort of industrialized honeybee farming. So it gives you a glimpse of these two different ways of producing honey. It also is a good reminder of how damn important pollinators are to our ecosystems. So definitely a must-watch on my list. More Than Honey. All right. Number 5, we're getting in the 5 zone. I don't think you say 5 zone, but whatever, in French, I can say it. Number 5 is sort of a hybrid between a film and a documentary. It's called Samsara, and I believe it was 5 years in the making, so quite a long time in many, many countries. All right, let me get that right. 25 countries, exactly. They filmed in 25 countries for over 5 years. And also Samsara, well, first of all, I should warn you, Samsara has no words. It's music and images. So no one is telling you anything throughout the entire film. But that doesn't matter, because the movie is really about drawing your own conclusions about mankind and the beauty of the natural landscapes we're surrounded with on the planet. It's one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. It's incredibly powerful, also because it has no words, really. It does allow you the space to come up with your own interpretation of the films, and it is incredibly striking. So I definitely recommend that one. It's not explicitly a documentary, but all the footage, nothing was acted out, so I guess that sort of makes it a documentary, blurry line. But yeah, definitely watch that one. Samsara, it's called. All right, number 4 is a huge classic. I'm sure many of you have already seen it or know about it, and it's called An Inconvenient Truth. An Inconvenient Truth is sort of Al Gore's call to action in terms of climate change and climate awareness. So Davis Guggenheim is a filmmaker that followed Al Gore on his circuit of lectures where he raises awareness about climate change. And this film is very much straight to the point. It's very informative. It's very well crafted. It's visually pleasing. It gives you all the fundamental knowledge that you need to understand climate change and why it's such a present issue. It also won an Oscar, so if that's another reason why you'd want to watch it. All right, moving on to the top 3, we're gonna go number 3. Number 3 is not a hugely famous film. I saw it for the first time at the Wild and Scenic Festival. I was there because I won a prize for my documentary, actually, but it was showing, and it's one of the movies that I went and saw, and oh my god, it is so visually striking. It's called Serengeti Rules. And what I find really, really interesting with this documentary is that it breaks down a biological concept in a very simple and understandable way. It gives people a solution to solving our climate and biodiversity issues, something that's incredibly biological, but they make it so it's very much understandable to the public and people who don't necessarily have a scientific background. It's an amazingly stunning film. The videography is mind-blowing. So if that's something that you're also interested in and you have a specific affinity to, Serengeti Rules is the film for you. Beautiful, beautiful movie, very informative and very well done. So that's why it takes the number 3 for the top of my list for me. All right, let's move on to number 2. What is my number 2? Let's get to it. Number 2 is Jane. Jane is an amazing movie. It's about the female scientist named Jane Goodall, and it's about her groundbreaking scientific work explaining and showcasing that chimpanzees have complex feelings. I know, today that sounds like, duh, of course they have feelings, all animals have feelings, but we have to understand that back in her era, at the beginning of her life, this was not commonplace. People thought that animals did not have feelings or did not necessarily feel pain or couldn't create friendships. So she really did lay down the groundwork for so much of what we're seeing today that is explaining the intelligence of nature, the intelligence of animal, and all of that. So it's an amazing film, a must watch. It's set mostly in Tanzania, and there's some amazing wildlife images in there. So definitely recommend it. That's why it's my number 2. She's such an incredible woman. So she deserves all the attention that she gets, if not more. All right, let's move on to my top 1, number 1. I believe it's on Netflix too, so that's awesome. And number 1 is Chasing Coral. I'm sure, as many of you know, coral reefs are vanishing all around the world, and this movie, Chasing Coral, is all about that. It's an investigative piece of scientists, filmmakers, photographers, and people who are committed to the conservation of the ocean, trying to find out why there is so much coral bleaching. It's a really groundbreaking movie as well. I think I also love it because it strikes a really interesting balance between being informative, being beautiful, and being entertaining. I mean, a lot of environmental films and documentaries aren't necessarily entertaining, but this one manages to strike all 3, and that's why it is my top 1 favorite environmental movie. I also think it does give you a lot of agency in regards to wanting to act for climate change mitigation and ocean conservation. So it's really an amazing movie. I love it, and I could watch it so many times. So yeah, that is my top 10. That wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give a thumbs up, subscribe, check out my other content, and I will see you in the next upload. Thank you.